Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, and welcome back to the next episode in the Ranking of Kings series, in which I'm going to rank every King book that I can get my hands on and read. So, today's episode is going to be taking a look at two, actually. We're going to be taking a look at the short story collection Skeleton Crew, which also includes The Mist novella. I'm going to be ranking The Mist separately, and that's how I'm probably going to be tackling all of King's collected novellas, the 4 novellas in different seasons and in the Bachman books. I'm going to be taking each one of those as a separate entity because I think each one does offer enough to examine on its own without being in context of a collection. So, Skeleton Crew was published in 1985, and it contains stories written between 1968 and 1985. So, it's a really long spread of time. You really get, it's almost like reading a history of Stephen King in this book, because you get to see the progress that he underwent while he was developing his voice, and through, really the most important part kind of his career was through like that mid 80s period. That is one thing I do really like about short story collections, especially when they span a long period of time. You get the sense of progression, of evolution, and of ideas, and of an author's voice, and that is very true about Skeleton King. However, short story collections for me are also really hard to rate as a whole, as a single entity. Am I supposed to rate this book based on its best examples or its worst examples? Can you somehow take them all and come up with some kind of average rating? It's really hard to think of a short story collection, a non-thematic short story collection. So some short story collections are super thematic, like Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow, right? I mean, that's like, it's almost like a novel because the short stories all share a theme. They share a direction of a total goal, a purpose. And so you can easily rate that as a single thing. This is a little more difficult because it feels more like just kind of a hodgepodge collection of stories, which it is. There's not an underlying theme or anything about these. I mean, these range from horror to almost comedy, some almost straight drama, and some science fiction. So short story collections can be hard to rate as a whole, and there can also be hit and miss, which unfortunately Skeleton Crew is a little hit and miss. On the hit sides, of course, you have some absolute like stone cold King classics. The Jaunt, which is like his foray into science fiction and about like kind of like traveling vast distances in space and time. And jaunting was actually a term coined by Alfred Bester in The Star's My Destination. It's about teleportation. You can jaunt, and that's kind of what this story is about. And of course, it has one of King's most chilling, haunting endings, and one of the great ending lines of a short story. For those of you who know, when it's longer than you think, Dad, longer than you think. Just, oh man, it just sends goosebumps up my spine when I hear that. And then the other great ones, you have Survivor Type. You have The Raft. You have some pretty good stories like Word Processor of the Gods, which is kind of like a classic Twilight Zone-esque story. The Monkey, which I find really chilling. It's, the monkey, of course, remember those old tambourine monkey toys? Those things are always creepy. Creepy toys are something that really gets under my skin, and that story really does. And then you have the rest are kind of just subpar, a couple clunkers, but overall, Skeleton Crew is a really, really solid collection of short stories, and the few in here that are fantastic are some of King's best stories he ever wrote. But the best of the best, I think, in Skeleton Crew is The Mist. And The Mist is just incredible. And like I said, I think it is important enough. It's good enough to just rank on its own, and it's a substantial read. You know, this little novella. It's 200 pages. I mean, that's how long science fiction novels were back in the 50s and 60s. So, yeah, The Mist is just great. It's a super prime example of like immensely readable Lovecraftian horror. Lovecraft and the Weird Writers, the Lovecraftian Circle guys, they could be somewhat difficult to read, and that was on purpose. They wrote in an affected style. They wrote in that purple prose. Their philosophy was, why say something in 10 words when you can take 50 words to say the same thing? And King like rejects all of that and writes a very Lovecraftian style horror story in his incredibly readable tone, his conversational tone, which is one of his greatest strengths. And that's why The Mist is so fantastic. He traps into Lovecraftian horror, this unknowable horror where something is coming from outside and like penetrating our reality, and we can only catch glimpses of it, and it causes madness. The novel, it's only like 200 pages, but it feels far more epic than it is. It's such a tightly balanced narrative. It's super cinematic, and he creates just this great sense of atmosphere. It's a kind of a classic bottle episode in TV tropes convention. He takes a group of characters, places them all in a very limited setting, and then pits them against an outside force and an internal struggle. And so in that sense, it's a very classic, almost like a classic love letter to the people that influenced King, like Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson and Twilight Zone. I like to think of The Mist as it's Night of the Living Dead meets Tremors, and that kind of gives you an idea of what it is if you have not experienced it. But like I said, it's also super cinematic. King, I think, was starting to write in a more cinematic way throughout the 80s, probably because his books were being turned into movies, and the 80s was such a fantastic time for horror cinema. And so I got the sense that King started working more with writing his books with purposeful camera directions and stage settings. He was almost like he was setting up the movies on his page. I don't know if if he knew that The Mist was going to become a movie. I don't know if it was optioned back then or not, but I think this is all really evident in Frank Darabont's amazing movie, The Mist, which is almost a scene for scene recreation of the book. And I don't necessarily feel that movies need to be faithful adaptations to be successful. Actually, I don't feel that way at all. Most of the time, I think a movie based on a book is better if it's its own thing. But Frank Darabont happens to be able to create these insanely faithful adaptations of King books and make them work. You have Shawshank Redemption and The Mist and Green Mile. So, of course, it's up until the end. The Frank Darabont's ending of The Mist is quite a bit different than Stephen King's, and Stephen King came out and said he actually prefers Darabont's ending. So, yeah, Darabont did a great job. The Mist is a fantastic little novel. One of my favorites. I love reading it. It's so fast, and it's so tense with a lot of great gore and monsters, both human and otherwise. So yeah, the Skeleton Crew and The Mist are two great classic examples of King when he was just knocking them out of the park left and right. So let's go to the board here. I'm gonna have to move my camera a little bit because I forgot to grab the board. All right, sorry about that. But all right, so I have my placards here for. We have for The Mist, and then we have Skeleton Crew. So let's do, and so far what we have here is we have Desperation and number 1. We've got the Tommyknockers, Firestarter, and Needful Things taking up the rear there. All right, so let's do Skeleton Crew first. Like I said, it's really hard to rank short story collections. I definitely liked it as a whole better than Needful Things. Definitely liked it better than Firestarter. I liked it better than Tommyknockers. I don't think I liked it better than Desperation. I think Desperation overall is just a better read when you're reading that many pages. So I'm going to put Skeleton Crew below Desperation. The Mist, on the other hand, this is a pretty easy one. This is, I think, I love this book, and I definitely like it more than Desperation because I actually think it tackles much of the same subject, the same kind of story of a group of characters, trapped together, and they have to figure out a way to solve their problems. It does all of what is in Desperation in like almost a third of the amount of pages and time. So really just a solid collection or a story there. So our ranking as of now is in number 1, The Mist dethroned Desperation, which was up in number 1 for 2 spots in a row, or 2 videos in a row, followed by Skeleton Crew, and then the Tommyknockers, Firestarter, and Needful Things. And then next up, very soon, I'll be doing a video this week. We will be taking a look at Pet Sematary. The book's so horrific that even Stephen King says it's too scary for him. And it's, spoiler alert, it's quite good. as if I'm saying something that you've never heard before, right? So, all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.